The shovel hit rock. The sound carried over the dry wind like a gunshot. Two men stood by the open pit, sweat carving clean lines through their dust-covered faces. Behind them, the desert stretched endless and bone-colored, shimmering under the noon sun. A third man leaned on his rifle, staring down at the woman sitting on her knees in the sand, wrists bound, hair tangled, eyes hollow but defiant. "Leave it," one of them muttered, his voice low. "Ground's too hard," the older man spat. "Then dig deeper. Ain't no grave shallow enough for a woman who betrayed her own kind." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of mesquite and gunpowder, and something else. Smoke, faint but real from far across the dunes. The woman's name was Clara Finch, and she hadn't closed her eyes in 2 days. Somewhere beyond those ridges, hidden in a crevice of rock and sage, lay a boy, the last surviving son of an Apache war chief, and she had protected him. They called it the Red Mesa country, land cut with blood and heat and silence. Folks said nothing grew here but bones and regret. Clara had come to it 4 years ago, the widow of a preacher who never made it home from the war. She'd taken work tending stock and stitching shirts at a remote trading post outside Fort Lyon, just another quiet woman trying to outrun her ghosts. But the war between the settlers and the Apaches had swallowed the land whole. Every dawn brought a new raid. Every dusk another burning homestead. Folks slept with rifles under their pillows. Then one evening, while the sun bled itself across the horizon, Clara found him, the boy, lying half dead beside a dry wash. Barefoot, feverish, his skin cracked from sun and whip. The marks on his back told her enough. Some bounty men had tried to drag him north and lost their way. He couldn't have been more than 12. She should have walked away. That's what the rules said. You saw one of them. You turned him in or turned your back. But he opened his eyes. And something in the way he looked at her, calm, proud even in pain, stopped her cold. So she did what no one in her right mind would do. She carried him. 2 days and 1 night she dragged that boy through red sand and thirst, hiding in dry creek beds by day, moving under stars by night. Her hands blistered. Her lips split. When her legs gave out, she still crawled. She whispered his name once. After he'd murmured it in fever, "Nantan, son of Chief Taji of the Chiricahua." Now, standing at the edge of her own grave, Clara thought of those nights. The moonlight on the rocks, the way he'd gripped her hand when she poured water down his throat. She didn't regret it, but the men from Fort Lyon sure wanted her to. Marshall says she hid him out there for near 3 days. One of them said, tossing another shovelful of earth aside, fed him, nursed him, let half the patrol die looking for him. The older one, a sergeant with a scar that split his chin, squinted down at her. "Tell me where he is, Mrs. Finch. Maybe we'll let the preacher say a few words before you go under." Clara met his eyes. There was nothing left in her but dust and stubborn grace. "You already dug my grave," she said quietly. "Might as well fill it." The younger man shifted uneasily. "She's just a woman, Harlan." "Not any more she ain't," the sergeant cut him off. "She's a traitor." Another gust blew across the desert, hot and bitter. From far off came a sound, faint, rhythmic, like hooves striking sand. Harlan straightened, hand going to his pistol. "You hear that?" The boy with the shovel froze, listening. The wind carried it again, a slow, steady beat, too measured for cattle, too soft for thunder. The Apache drum. Clara's eyes flicked toward the ridges. For the first time since her capture, she breathed, a sharp, broken thing like hope. "Damn it," Harlan hissed. "Mount up, now!" The men scrambled, panic lighting their faces. The shovel dropped beside the half-dug grave, forgotten. Harlan turned back once, rifle raised toward Clara. "If they find you alive, they'll do worse than we would." Then he was gone. Dust trailing behind him like smoke from a fire he couldn't outrun. The desert fell silent again. Only the shovel remained, half buried in the earth that had been meant to swallow her. Clara stood slowly, wrists raw against the rope, and stared toward the horizon where the drums grew louder. The war might be coming for her now, but so was the boy she'd saved. The sound of the drums died with the night. By dawn, only the wind remained, sharp and cold enough to cut. Clara had freed herself before the moon fell. She'd used the broken edge of the shovel to tear through the rope at her wrists, bleeding her hands raw in the process. By morning she was moving again, barefoot through the red dust, following the faint line of hoofprints left by her captors. not because she wanted revenge, but because she knew where they were going, and she knew who they'd find. Therefore behold it. 3 nights earlier, the boy had been delirious, burning with fever. She'd hidden him in the skeleton of a dried-up well, covering the entrance with brush and stones. "Stay here," she'd whispered, pressing a canteen into his hands. "Don't move till I come back." He just looked at her, wide-eyed, silent, and then nodded once. There was something solemn in that gesture, like he already knew she was walking into a storm she wouldn't come back from. She'd meant to fetch help, or at least draw the soldiers away. But she hadn't made it 5 miles before the patrol found her tracks. Now, as the sun climbed, Clara stumbled over the ridge toward the well again, lungs burning. The desert was merciless, swallowing sound and reason alike. Every few steps she glanced behind her, expecting rifles, shouts, the sharp report of a carbine. Nothing. Just silence. When she reached the cluster of stones, she fell to her knees and clawed away the brush. Empty. Her heart stuttered. She looked around, scanning the horizon, and that's when she saw the footprints, small, bare, leading north, toward the canyon. The boy had run. By the time she found him, the sun was low and the sky bleeding into violet. Nantan sat by a trickle of water that bled from a crack in the rock, his back straight, his hands still. He turned when she approached. The look in his eyes made her stop. "You came back," he said in halting English. "Of course I did." She sank beside him, too tired to cry, too weak to smile. "You think I'd leave you?" He studied her for a long time. Then quietly, "You should have." Clara looked out across the desert, to the same horizon she'd watched her husband vanish into years ago, riding off with the cavalry and never returning. She'd buried a ring, a Bible, and the last piece of her heart back then. But something about this boy, the way he refused to break even after all that pain, had stirred the part of her that still believed in mercy. "I've left enough behind in my life," she whispered. "Not this time." They sheltered that night in a hollow of sandstone. The boy slept light, twitching at every sound. Clara stayed awake, staring at the thin sliver of moon and thinking about what would come next. The soldiers would ride hard through the night. They'd know the boy was near, and if they caught her again, it wouldn't be another shallow grave. She thought about riding south to Mexico, or east to the mission towns. But either way, they'd have to cross open land. The only way to survive was through the canyon, Apache land. "Your people will kill me," she murmured. From beside her came a quiet voice. "They will see what I see." Clara turned. The boy was awake, eyes gleaming in the firelight. "What's that?" "You give without ask," he said. "That means something." He looked older in that moment, not 12, not a child, but something ancient carried in the blood of his father's people. The wind picked up, carrying sand through the fire. She pulled her shawl tight and watched him turn his gaze to the dark sky. Somewhere out there, soldiers were tightening their reins, following tracks that vanished with every gust. Somewhere ahead, a camp of Apaches waited, their hearts heavy with grief and vengeance for a lost chief's son. Between those two worlds, the white and the red, Clara Finch stood alone, a woman who had no country left but her conscience. She reached over and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then we'll go to them," she said softly. "And may God help us both." The boy nodded once. Solemn and sure. The fire died to embers. In the distance, under the stars, the first howl of a coyote rose, long and low, like the desert itself was mourning what it knew must come. By morning, the canyon walls rose around them like the ribs of some ancient beast. The air turned cool, the wind hushed, and the light thinned to a pale gold that flickered between the rocks. Clara and Nantan moved in silence, their footsteps soft on the sand. The boy walked ahead now, sure-footed, following signs only he could read. A bent reed, a dark stain on stone, a crow feather wedged in a crack. To her it was nothing but dust and superstition. To him it was a language. She trusted him, not because she understood him, but because he seemed to belong to this place in a way she never could. The canyon twisted, narrowing into a gash of shadow. Clara stopped once, hand braced against the stone. She could feel the tremor in her limbs, hunger, exhaustion, fear. "Rest," the boy said without looking back. She shook her head. "Not till we're safe." He turned then, eyes sharp. No one is safe in a place between worlds. Something in the way he said it made her chest tighten. She didn't ask what he meant. By noon, the silence changed. It started as a whisper, a sound so soft she thought it was wind over rock. Then came the echo of something heavier, metal, hooves. Nantan stopped, crouching low. Clara knelt beside him, following his gaze toward the mouth of the canyon. Dust rose there, faint but growing. "They're coming," she whispered. The boy's jaw clenched. "Soldiers!" The hoofbeats grew louder, joined by the jingle of bridles and the creak of leather. A voice shouted an order, sharp and distant. Clara grabbed the boy's hand. "We have to move." He didn't argue. They ran, stumbling through the winding canyon, slipping over stone and gravel, hearts hammering in sync with the thunder behind them. The sound echoed off the walls, turning into a storm that surrounded them. Then silence again, too sudden, too complete. Nantan slowed. Clara caught her breath, looking back down the path they'd come. No riders in sight, only the dust settling. "Maybe they—" she started. The rifle crack cut her off. A bullet screamed past her ear, sparking off stone. She dropped to the ground, pulling the boy down with her. The echo rolled through the canyon like thunder. "They found us," she hissed. Nantan's face was calm, eerily so. He pointed toward a narrow slit in the rock ahead. "There." They scrambled into it, barely wide enough to squeeze through, and found themselves in a hollow lit by a single shaft of sunlight. Inside lay old ashes, bones, and a woven mat half buried in dust. Clara pressed her back against the wall, panting. "They'll corner us here." Nantan looked toward the ashes. His fingers brushed the mat, tracing a symbol burned into it. Then he said quietly, "Not soldiers. My people." She stared. "What?" The boy turned toward the light. They follow, they wait. "For me." Before she could speak, the canyon filled with a new sound. Not rifles, not boots and drums. Slow, steady, ancient. The echo of them moved through the stone, deep enough to shake the air. Clara's blood ran cold. "They'll kill me," she whispered. Nantan's gaze didn't waver. "They will judge you." The drums grew louder, joined by a distant chant, low voices carrying a rhythm older than the fort, older than the nation itself. Through the narrow slit of the rock, she saw figures appear, riders draped in red and black, faces painted, eyes like fire. The Apaches had come. They waited outside the canyon's mouth until the light began to fade. One of them dismounted and raised his hand, palm forward in silence. Nantan stepped forward. "Don't," Clara whispered, grabbing his arm. He looked at her, then placed his small hand over hers. "If I don't speak, they will kill you before the sun sleeps." He slipped from her grasp and walked into the light. The sight of him, the boy she'd carried through the desert, froze the riders where they stood. Murmurs broke out. A name was spoken, Taji's son. Clara stepped out after him, slow, trembling. The warriors turned their eyes on her, hard, unreadable. The man in front, tall and scarred, dismounted. He spoke to the boy in a language that rolled like thunder. Nantan answered softly. Then the man's gaze turned on Clara. "You hide him," he said in rough English. "You lie for him," her voice cracked. "I saved him." The man's eyes narrowed. "We decide if saving means mercy," he said. Behind him, the drums stopped. The air stood still. The desert had gone quiet again, waiting for what would come next. They took her at dusk. Two warriors bound Clara's hands again, but not roughly. She noticed the difference. Not cruelty, but ritual. Respect wrapped in caution. The Apaches moved with purpose, silent and measured. Their faces unreadable in the flickering light of the fires they built beneath the canyon walls. They led her and the boy into a circle of flame and shadow. Dozens of eyes followed her, old eyes, young eyes, all shaped by dust and sorrow. The scarred man from before sat cross-legged near the largest fire, a heavy blanket over his shoulders, feathers braided through his black hair. The others called him Nale, which Clara guessed meant chief or elder. The boy Nantan stood before him, small but proud, his face painted in ash. He spoke in his own tongue, fast and low, voice trembling with something like urgency. Clara couldn't understand the words, but she didn't need to. She could see it in his expression. He was pleading for her life. Nale listened, unmoving. Then when the boy stopped, he lifted his eyes toward her. "You are the woman who carried the son of Taji," he said in careful English. "Through the desert, alone." Clara swallowed, the heat from the fire licking her face. "Yes, you knew he was Apache." "Yes." He nodded once, as if confirming a truth he already knew. "And you still gave him water." She met his gaze. "Wouldn't you have done the same?" A murmur rippled through the circle. Some of the warriors scowled. One woman, older, her face a map of years, lowered her head, eyes glinting in the firelight. Nala's voice softened. "The world you come from does not give water." "It takes it," Clara hesitated. "Maybe mine forgot how, but I remembered." The chief studied her for a long time. Then he said something in Apache, and the boy answered quietly. The fire cracked, sending sparks into the dark. Finally, Nale rose. He moved slowly with the weight of age and loss. He reached into the ashes and pulled out a charred object, small, circular. He brushed the soot away and held it toward her. A pendant, silver, hammered into the shape of a hawk. It shimmered faintly in the firelight. "This was Taji's," he said. "He wore it the day the soldiers came." His jaw tightened. "They killed him while he begged for peace." Clara lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." "Sorry does not bring breath back to the bones," Nale replied, "but it can make the earth less heavy." He stepped closer, close enough for her to see the sorrow in his face. "Why did you save his son?" The question cut deep. Clara's voice broke as she answered, "Because I lost mine." The circle went still. The fire popped, and for a long time no one moved. "I buried him in Kansas," she went on, staring into the flames. "He was 10. Fever took him before the war even ended. I remember holding him when he couldn't breathe. I remember thinking, no mother should watch a child die alone in the dirt." Her shoulders trembled. "So when I found your boy lying there, half dead, I didn't see an Apache. I saw my son." A long silence followed. The old woman near the fire lifted her head, her eyes wet now. Nantan stood motionless, his lips parted. He stepped forward and placed a hand over her bound wrists. "In the flicker of the flames," he said softly, "she gave me back my father's breath." Nale closed his eyes. Around them the others whispered, voices soft as wind. The weight of the desert seemed to lift just slightly. The elder opened his eyes again and spoke in Apache. The words rolled slow, reverent. When he finished, one of the women came forward and cut Clara's bindings. Nale looked at her again. "You are not prisoner here. You are guest." Clara blinked, barely breathing. "Guest?" He nodded. "The spirits saw what you did. You carried life where death had already walked." He glanced toward Nantan. "The son of Taji lives. So shall you." The boy turned to her and smiled, faint, fragile but real. For the first time since she'd seen him bleeding in the sand, Clara felt something uncoil in her chest. Not hope exactly, but release. Above them, the canyon sky deepened to indigo, the stars cold and sharp. The wind carried the smell of smoke and sage. Clara sat by the fire that night with the boy beside her, the hawk pendant gleaming between them, and for the first time in years, she didn't dream of graves, only open sky. But far to the east, beyond the canyon's edge, torchlight flickered in the dark. The soldiers were still coming. The first gunshots shattered the dawn. Clara woke to the echo rolling through the canyon like thunder, the air filled with shouts in English and the crack of rifles. The Apache camp burst into motion, men grabbing bows, women pulling children toward the rocks. Smoke from the dying fire mixed with the rising dust. Another shot rang out, closer this time. A man fell beside the fire pit, blood staining the sand. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. The soldiers had found them. Nale barked orders, his voice steady, even as chaos rippled through the camp. Warriors melted into the rocks, moving like shadows. Nantan grabbed Clara's arm. "Stay down!" he shouted. She ducked behind a boulder as a volley of shots tore through the canyon. The smell of gunpowder burned her nose. She could hear English voices now, the sharp, cruel bark of men who thought they were heroes. "Fan out! Find the boy!" The words cut through her like a blade. Nantan was beside her, clutching the hawk pendant at his chest. His small frame trembled, but his eyes burned with something fierce and unbroken. Clara grabbed his shoulders. "Listen to me. If they catch you," he shook his head. "They won't." Another shot struck the stone above them, showering dust over their faces. Clara coughed, eyes stinging. She could hear boots now, close, too close. Nale appeared from the smoke, bow in hand, arrows fanned across his chest. He looked at her, a strange mixture of command and sorrow in his gaze. "They will not stop," he said. "Not until they take him." Clara's heart pounded. "Then we run." Nale nodded once, then turned and shouted something in Apache. A woman answered from across the rocks. She was motioning toward a narrow gap at the far end of the canyon. "Go," Nale said. "Follow the riverbed. It will hide your tracks." "What about you?" Clara asked. He met her eyes. "We were born from this earth. If we die on it, it is not loss." Before she could answer, another explosion shook the ground. Smoke rolled over them, thick and choking. Nale vanished into it, loosing arrows with steady rhythm. 1, 2, 3, until his figure disappeared behind the haze. Clara grabbed Nantan's hand and ran. The canyon narrowed, rocks tearing at her skirt as she pulled the boy through the passage. The shouts grew faint behind them, muffled by the bend of stone. Her lungs burned, every breath fire. When they finally stumbled out into open desert, the sun was already high, cruel and white. They ran until her legs gave way. She dropped to her knees beside the dry riverbed, chest heaving. Nantan knelt beside her, panting. "They'll come. I know," she said. Her voice was raw, scraped clean of fear. "But not yet." She looked east. The horizon shimmered, endless and bright. For the first time there was no sound, no drums, no guns, no screaming wind. Just stillness. Then she noticed blood. Her sleeve was soaked. The bullet must have grazed her side when they fled, but now the wound throbbed with heat. She pressed her hand to it, forcing a breath through her teeth. The boy's face changed, fear giving way to something else. He reached for her hand. "I can help," she tried to smile. "You already did." He shook his head, eyes glistening. "You gave me back life. I will give it back to you." He tore a strip from his own tunic and pressed it against the wound, his hands trembling but determined. Clara's vision swam, the world blurring into sunlight and sand. "Nantan," she whispered. "If you ever make it home—" "I am home," he said. The words hit her harder than the pain. She looked at him, the son of a chief, the child she'd carried through death and desert, and realized the truth she'd never spoken aloud. She hadn't saved him out of guilt. She'd saved him because he was the only piece of hope left in her world. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver hawk pendant. "Take it," she said. He shook his head. "It's yours now." "No," she whispered, pressing it into his palm. "It always was yours." When the soldiers finally reached the canyon, they found only ashes and wind. They searched for tracks, for bodies, for the woman who had defied them. But the desert had already swallowed everything. Weeks later, a rancher's boy found a small Apache child walking along the dry river near Santa Fe. Around his neck hung a silver hawk. He said little, only that a white woman had carried him through the desert, and that when he turned to look back, she was gone. Years passed. The boy grew into a man. Some said he became a bridge between two nations. Others said he vanished into the mountains, where the wind still carried the echo of drums. But those who lived near the Red Mesa told another story, that sometimes, when the sun sinks over the canyons and the desert glows like fire, you can see a woman walking beside a boy through the dust. Her hands are scarred, her eyes full of mercy, and behind them no footprints at all.